forum, so if you'd like, we'll go ahead and get started. I do have one change on the agenda. If we can move under 4 discussion items, if we can move 4B ahead of 4A. Kevin and Harvey are here to discuss that, and they have to get out to the schools today. So if I can have a motion to reorganize the agenda.
So moved. Second.
We'll take that as all in favor.
But only for Kevin and Harvey.
Only for them. So we'll do a real quick, go ahead.
I can't sign in, or it's not.
Yeah, me neither, but I don't know how to work this anyway.
Go to IBIS class, click on IBIS class, and type in training 1. Don't worry, I had to get a lesson also.
Training number 1?
Training 1, just like it's written there.
Oh. I'm impressed.
Like I said, someone showed me, so I'm just sharing.
Thank you.
Okay, well.
Are you in? Yeah,
Thank
good.
you.
Okay. If we can start with welcome and introductions. Karen, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Karen Marcus, I'm here on behalf of Barbara McQuinn, District 1.
Kathy Gunlack here on behalf of Karen Brill.
I'm Steve Sills representing Chuck Shaw.
Sherry Brown representing Erica Whitfield.
Heather Canoose, Budget Director and Staff Liaison.
Good morning, Mike Burke, CFO.
Harvey Wahaga, Director of the Department of Multicultural Education.
Good morning, Kevin McCormick, Director of Exceptional Student Education.
And in the audience?
Michelle Trout, Budget Department.
Curtis Stoppy, Budget Department. Raymond Church, Budget Department.
Okay. And at 10:17, if it's okay with the committee, we'll take a moment of silence for the Parkland shooting. Any public comments? Okay. And action items, we have the minutes from January 8th meeting.
Move approval.
Second.
All those in favor, all those opposed, motion carries unanimously. Okay, we'll move it over to Specialized Education Management Platform and our dynamic duo.
So I'll go ahead and start. One thing we learned through this RFP process is that the systems out there are very similar for both ELL and ESE, but also based on our programs, very different. So that being said, our current state within the ESE process management with the IEP system, 504, gifted plan, we use our eForm system, which is self-created within our school district, which provides us, the final is pretty much a PDF that doesn't really provide the opportunity to pull all the data that is inputted into these forms to be able to utilize for planning purposes and programming. So within those documents, only one staff member can work within the document at a time, which when you have multiple teachers, therapists, and service providers working to try to create the document, if they're typically waiting on one person to finish their piece to route it on to the next so they can continue with that particular plan. Talked about the data being pulled. So the other aspect within the IEP form, I know some of you are familiar with it, you're putting the same information into the form in multiple different places. This will alleviate, what we're proposing will alleviate that issue, and once you put it in once, that same information will populate across multiple forms where which will especially impact our therapists with the IEP goals and the plan of care that they're required to draft or to make for their service. So the desired state would be to allow multiple people to work within the document, push and pull data. We want the system to be intuitive, to be able to not only move information across forms, but to inform based on all the data we have in other systems to inform our staff for better present levels of performance, but also goal making. We also, the product that we're looking at will also align all federal and state requirements for compliance purposes and enforce compliance in many different areas to be able to make sure that it's auditable and compliant. The other aspect, real quick, is that we're looking at, within the IEP system, having 8 languages being able to be translated in dynamic and static text. So a lot of our parents who don't speak English are able to participate with our community language facilitators assisting, but in the document they take home, everything typed into it is in English, so they can't really see what the plan is for their child. This will allow for them to get all information placed in that document, translated, so they can participate more and better. So the RFP winner, the person who came out to not only provide what we asked for, but offer more, was Public Consulting Group's Ed Plan. They exceeded the expectations. Right now, 1 in every 4 IEPs in the United States are currently in this system. They're in Broward County, so they are Florida compliant and understand our systems based on being in Broward for about 18 years. They also work with the School District of Palm Beach County for our Medicaid billing, so we're already doing business with them within our system, sharing information. And they continue to reinvest in their technology, and as they do that, the benefits of that is that we'll have access to this technology as they grow and evolve. So this is just a visual of what we'll be receiving. The end plan is going to provide supports and process documents within special education, gifted, private school service plans, 504 plans. We have the option for threat assessment, and along with that, I just mentioned the Google translation, but also scanning and faxing documents within that system is allowable and possible. So system inputs will be providing the plan documents, child count reporting. One thing we've talked about to this group in the past is that our goal would be to pull direct services that are written on the plan out of the IEPs to be able to eventually allocate resources to schools on a student need basis rather than a head count of how many students are in each program, because just because they're in that program doesn't mean they all get the same level of service. So we want to extract that service to be able to differentiate our allocations to schools and be more fair to all schools to make sure we're providing appropriate services. We already proved it's going to integrate directly with their Medicaid documentation, of which we're already doing business with, data input and import and export, and then, of course, it'll integrate within our single sign-on system within the portal. They already have proven to integrate with Focus, which is our student information system, and then additional data sources such as Performance Matters, which is where all of our standards-based assessments are stored in. Our goal is to be able to pull present levels out of the assessments that we already have in our system straight into the IEP system to be able to inform present levels of performance and therefore write more appropriate, measurable IEP goals. The bottom strip right there talks about the project management support. They'll have project management on their end. We'll be working with our PMO department within the school district to be able to ensure that we stay on our timelines for implementation. Also within the contract, we had date certain payment, so their payment will be dependent on meeting those benchmarks and timelines that we have set and agreed upon. If they don't meet their timeline, they don't get paid. And then, of course, trainer and end user support. Easy IEP is the actual product for the IEP system. It provides structure in developing the present levels of performance, but also goals and benchmarks. It's been a constant struggle, and training opportunities for our teachers to be able to write measurable goals that directly align to the standards the student should be learning. So we'll be providing structures for our teachers to be able to ensure that they're writing appropriate goals, that they're measurable, and when they're in the classrooms providing direct support to students, that support will directly align with what the general education teacher is teaching, and it won't be something completely different, which is something we commonly see within our system.
You have a question?
Yeah, just a question, and this may not be, I just went through an IEP process 2 weeks ago, and they're doing all the things that they have to try to get her to get to the next level or achieve her grade level. But at the end of the day, and this may be something you can't do anything about, when they post what their grade is, it doesn't reflect the gains they've made and things like that. Is there any provision in here to do a comparative? Because I understand it's the state that says everybody's got to be graded by the same system, but these kids shouldn't be, and it makes them feel bad. That's part of the issue with this process, I think, is that they feel like they're stupid, and they're not. So I just didn't know if through this process, that even though it's not, you still have to get to the end goal of the grade, but somewhere in between there's something else that you can put on there that says have exceeded or have,
Yes.
grown or something like that to give them a positive, them and the parents.
So that's a two-part question. One of them you already answered for me, because yes, we will always measure them on the mastery of the standard, just like if they were a gen ed student, because we need to make sure that our goal is for them to reach that mastery, and we want to show an accurate representation of their performance. The IEP system we also asked for a progress monitoring tool within the IEP system. So our ESE service provider will be able to document progress on goals within the system. So you as the parent and the child, depending on their age, their gen ed teacher, can see the progress on the goals based on the services being provided within the IEP system. So quarterly or by trimester, depending on what grades the child's at, you would be able to push out that data to the parent to be able to show progress on specific goals as they work towards meeting those standards, which will reflect on their progress report and report card.
Yeah, it will reflect on there then, because that they do tell us the improvement, but it's not written anywhere. And so when the child gets her report card, they're talking about sealing it. And I said, we can't do that. She's got to see.
Right. So, yeah, the progress monitoring tool within the system will be able to assist you in knowing how much progress they've made within that goal to be able to work towards whatever standards they're having difficulty with.
So you just have to tell them still. It's not going to be reflective on anything.
Yeah, one thing we've learned, and you'll hear it through, I don't want to steal Harvey's thunder, but they have a collaborate model within, or platform within the ELL system, which allows teachers to work together within the system to share strategies in what's working for children with that learning profile, or whatever level they're at within their skill development. That is something we in ESE are very interested in, because planning is this system alone is going to save in planning time. That is a no-brainer. But the planning aspect of the collaboration between the ESE teacher and the gen ed teacher is also time-consuming, and we want to hopefully make that easier for them. So in the future, if we still have development hours, that would be something we would consider to build in this, to make sure we're fostering collaboration so we can enhance service.
Yeah, they're doing all that. It's just when you say how she's progressing and she's improved by this much, and then you look at the scores when she brings home, and she feels bad because she's below where she's supposed to be in everything.
Yeah.
And yet she's not seeing, other than them telling her, wow, you're doing really great. So that's a paperwork issue. And
from an administrative perspective, progress monitoring is the way to improve service, from my perspective. If you are monitoring the service, whether it's directly or indirectly, both at the teacher level and at the administrative level, it's likely that we're able to improve service and get better outcomes for students. So our goal is to be able to, with this system, enhance the monitoring capability at the school-based level, at the regional level, at the district level, to be able to provide differentiated support for the teachers to be able to provide service to the students. Not every case is going to make them proficient.
Right.
It all depends on the disability and where their unique, how their unique disability affects their learning.
So you're talking about a lot levels above the child, and Karen's talking about the child.
Absolutely.
And, is that something you might look at in the future, is how to modify the progress report that the child sees so that it reflects the progress she's making?
If a child is on general education standards, whether they have a disability, they're an English language learner, or have a 504, or even gifted, they're all held to the same standard based on them. And I prefer it that way because we don't want a different standard for a child with a disability. We want to teach them as if they're going to meet the standard, and then
That's not the question.
Yeah, the question is somewhere along the way, I mean, these kids are very sensitive to, everybody brings a report card home, everybody looks at them, and all you see is not proficient for the kid. Is there some handout where this child can see in paper that their improvement, that they actually have gained almost to the standard? That it's almost a psychological thing?
then that would be within the progress monitoring aspect. Go back to the original part of the response. And also teachers have data chats and conversations in small group while they're conferring. That's where the rubber meets the road, and we need to make sure that the teachers get the training and support to make sure they're communicating with children on their progress or lack of.
Well, that's something that we can look into
Okay.
as well as to, because the report
Sorry.
cards, falls under another department. So we
Okay.
can see whether it's something that's mandated by the state or whether there is a possibility to add an attachment or maybe some additional language. Because, I definitely see where you're coming from. So if
Kevin,
we can bring that back to the next meeting.
That'd be
I can
great.
look into it.
Sorry to take up so
Okay,
much
so
time.
no, you're good, because that's, and he's interpreting for me over here. So the question is, and basically what he's clarified for me is, can the progress monitoring aspect of this be on the report card? Ideally, yes, ideally. Right now, it's a separate document.
But
But
the
it's not
document,
something she gets on a report card,
Yeah.
sorry.
No.
She does, the kid, I'm focused on the child.
Yeah.
She does not see it where it says some little check that says,
You made progress.
yes.
But in this system, there's an opportunity for
Okay.
that progress to be printed and then included with the report card. There, that is an option.
it's a visual.
Correct.
Yes.
The progress monitoring tool is either a graph or a chart,
Right.
and it can show how they are progressing in conjunction with the standard. So it is a visual. It could go in right with the report card as a separate piece, so
And
they
with-
can see their progress.
And with this system, that opportunity is a lot easier because it's not so paper pencil. There's an option for progress monitoring, and they could print something that would be able to be included with the report card.
And there
yes.
is some requirement, correct, of teachers to, of ESE teachers to do some sort of report card? Don't they have to show progress on the skills at report card time?
Well, I'm actually working with CTA right now to discuss that because some of our ESE teachers that push into a gen ed classroom, they technically don't have to do lesson plans because they're supporting the gen ed teachers, and they're not technically doing grades because the gen ed teacher, the teacher of record, is doing the grades. So what we're working with both our labor relations and CTA on is making sure that ESE teachers are documenting their service, what this will assist with, and progress monitoring on their goals to show the progress that you're hoping to see and that we show to the student to be able to show the hard work is paying off.
I'm seeing the progress. The teachers are seeing the progress.
The
The
student's
child is
not.
not seeing it when they compare, and they're very visual, and they're all together, and they show their report cards. And it's that emotional side to give them the confidence to keep trying that hard, so.
Should help.
And I apologize for addressing it at a different level,
That's
but
okay.
some of that comes with professional development for the teacher to make sure the teacher is conferring with the student and making sure they're aware of their growth.
They're all her stuff. Teachers are doing everything that you just said they should do. They're
Good.
collaborating. They're doing all that stuff. And they're telling us, but it's hard to just tell her when, again, it's about the visuals.
Well, and this provides that, and the second bullet right there talks about the ability to graphically plot the data we put in there. So that will allow for a visual representation, not even, in addition to the numerical, the quantifiable data that we're putting in, this will be able to graphically plot whatever data we put in the system, which will give us the opportunity to be able to progress monitor and have chats with kids to make sure they know their growth. You're welcome. Okay. Benefits would be supplemental services offered beyond the scope of the RFP, which would include additional development hours, Google Translation services, training videos, progress monitoring tool, paperless attachment services, e-signature when the state's ready to allow us to move forward with e-signature. That will be a capability that we'll be able to turn on when we need it. and then to give all teachers the tools they need to support, tools in the form of data and also time. So increase the ability to develop and monitor and also implement effective IEPs, to track academic progress towards IEP goals, which we just discussed, and then allocate resources through a budget process. Steve?
Talk to me a little bit more about how this tool would interact with the system of allocating resources. Because obviously,
Okay.
in a school center, stability of resources is critical to meeting students' needs. So how would that work?
Okay, so right now, we are unable to currently, let's talk as a school-based administrator. Let's say that you want to know how many students are receiving support facilitation in the 4th grade in language arts. There's no way of us knowing that without going through every single IEP document. You'll be able to pull a report to be able to assist with scheduling, but also providing service. And then from a district level, we'll be able to pull that same type of report to say how many kids are getting consult services for language arts, how many kids are getting support facilitation, how many kids are getting direct ESE service for whatever subjects. We'll be able to weigh those levels of services to be able to impact the allocation, which will be more on a needs-based, based on being able to weigh the levels of services and to be able to actually interact with that data. Right now, it's if you have a child who's in a specific program, we count the level of students in that program and allocate accordingly. We don't differentiate based on need. Does that answer it?
In terms of the allocation of resources, that's typically done, well, you have your spring allocation, you've got 11th day count adjustments. Would this lead to a more ongoing review of the allocation of resources during the year? And
We don't foresee
you're
that.
not envisioning that, are you?
No, we don't foresee that.
No.
Okay.
No,
but I
it's
think-
just trying to take the current formula that we have right now, which is really just counting heads in a program, and trying to attach and relate it to the actual needs of the students. Because being a school-based administrator, you know that there is varying different needs at different school sites. So.
And while it's not an ongoing situation, I think it'll allow us to better allocate upfront for the actual needs of the students in that particular program. So the need for ongoing may not be there because we'll be able to kind of capture it right then in the moment.
So we'll still have the 2 allocation milestones, one in the spring, which we're moving toward. I'm sure Heather will be talking about that today, and then at the 11-day count.
And it's just right now, we don't have the information to be able to even think about
accurately,
incorporating it within the allocation. This is going to be able to give us the opportunity to see whether it's an option. That's our goal. We still don't know.
Okay.
We still need the system regardless.
I envisioned a kind of a constant revision of allocation of resources that would be very disruptive in terms of delivering services. So you answered my question.
Okay.
So could you talk about did you develop this, or is this something you're buying?
This is something we're purchasing. We put a RFP out to the public, and companies bidded on it. And one thing we don't want to develop it. If we were developing it, we could develop it in-house. Right. This is something because of the complexities of programming, and there are companies that have been doing this for many, 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 many years and have the established products. This one specifically has been in Broward for a long time. So our goal and expectation is that we'll be able to integrate it within our systems and then have a pilot period where 30, 40 schools, a small group of schools will implement in August, and then come January, depending on that level of implementation, we'll determine how we move from there, whether we go full district or whether we add additional schools, depending on how we're meeting those milestones and how the system is integrating with our other systems. But also, the risk that we have there is the acceptance and learning curve of staff using it. That is something based on our friends to the south. implementing this and knowing teachers that have come from there to here. It's very process-oriented, so you go step by step through the document. The learning is not as much of a concern. Change and how people accept change is a little more of a concern, but not to the degree that I don't think we can meet our milestones for implementation.
And as a clarification, this is what we're recommending to the board to approve from the RFP. We're recommending for their
Well,
approval.
And I was just trying to see what it was you were recommending, that you,
Yeah.
how much, is there any modification between Broward and Palm Beach County that
Yes.
you've made? Oh.
Yes, there will be an integration phase. Right now, we're looking at the March board for the recommendation, and then kick off process reviews, system configuration. As much as we follow the same rules as Broward does from the state level, we've created our own document through the lessons we've learned over time to make sure that our IEP flows through the problem-solving process and making sure we're doing what's best for kids. We don't want to lose that by taking on whatever Broward's doing. We're going to make sure that the system integrates into how we already do business, just in a more efficient way.
More efficient at the end, but more opportunity for difficulties in getting it done. You mentioned some benchmarks that people wouldn't be paid. Is that in?
Yeah, and that will be specifically, we're going through the contract right now and we're finalizing that contract. Those specific milestones are defined within the contract between the school district and the contracted company.
I've worked in the current system, and it is not user-friendly. I've spent hours writing IEP goals, transferring them to the next person, and they get lost in outer space somewhere. I don't quite know how that works.
Because somebody may not save it appropriately, and therefore...
And if you don't follow some very intricate steps, you lose your whole document. You can be sitting at a table with parents, and everything goes away. The Medicaid piece, I have spent half a day doing Medicaid, and I got paid a lot of money at the time, and nobody qualified. It was very arduous task. People said bad words when they did it because it's such a pain. And if this integrates that, it will be so much easier. The time saved will be, I believe, tremendous, because the system is just extremely frustrating. Now, do you end up with a paper document, or are you going to end up in?
Right away, yes. We are going to have the source document is going to be
In
the
the file
paper
still?
at the school in the file. I think we're not ready to move away from that yet. I don't foresee us moving away from that anytime soon. But we have the opportunity to in the future with our student information system being as robust as it is, and the IEP and ELL system as well.
The
But
other
we'll still have it electronically,
Yeah,
too.
we'll have it electronically.
The other piece of this that's important, now things are not immediately populated, so people have to do the same information on 3 different forms. So this will take place of that timely, or not timely, duplication of work. So if it automatically does it, it should free up, especially speech and language pathologists who tend to have, some of them, fairly significant caseloads, having to do 3 documents on one person. And it's periodically they do it, not just once. So it should save a lot of time, hopefully.
And when we have multiple source documents all reflecting the same information, it leaves opportunity for error, which could possibly lead to audit findings and all of that.
The features just sound wonderful and exactly what teachers and people would want. I just would like more information about the development stage and the implementation stage. Anything can die in either of those, and so I'd like you to talk to us some about how you prevent the losing information if somebody doesn't save it.
So let me go through mine, and I'll try to address those topics because it's very similar in both platforms. And so hopefully we can get to both of those. And if not, ask again to make sure we answer your question. So very similar on the ELL side. We actually compete a lot now. Which process is more complex? We both think our processes are complex, and they are. In the ELL world, we have lots of different people who are responsible for this at different schools, depending on the size of the population of ELLs in the school. And so that makes it a little challenging for us. Having staff be able to collaborate and meet throughout the year is also very challenging because in the ELL world, there's lots of meetings, reevaluation meetings, very similar to the ESC world. And so really trying to have the opportunity to reduce some of the paperwork so we can really focus on instruction is really our main goal. And so just like Kevin's platform, we're looking to be able to pull data more efficiently, have a system that would be more intuitive, because we have wonderful people in our schools who are doing this work, but because we are also very paper-based, there's a lot of room for potential error. There's a lot of integration of mail merging and things like that, and there's just places where we can miss pieces. And so we want to limit that as much as possible. And while we have lots of parent letters, for example, in many languages, we don't have them in every language possible. So that still continues to be a challenge for us. So we have the major 8, but as we know, we have over 150 languages in our district. So we're trying to find ways to enhance that. So our recommendation is elevation. And so what you'll notice is we actually did try to go together to make the process easier for schools to have one platform that we could all use together. But what we found through the process is the PCG has really been focused on ESC students for their whole career. That's really what they do. Similar elevation, their only focus is ELL students. And so finding products that are very focused on those different populations to ensure that in the product development stage that is developed with state and federal regulations in mind, but that are focused on those needs. And so our product is in over 40 states, and you'll notice the big districts here at the bottom in Florida. It says 600 districts. It's actually closer to 700 now over this last year. Of course, Broward, Miami-Dade, Hillsborough are some of the largest in our state, but they're also in many other large districts across the nation. And so part of the platform that's really exciting for us, similar to Kevin's, is the development. There's not as much need for that because we already have it. They're already created for Florida, and they're already done in large urban districts. So some of the work is really about, the development's really more about personalizing it for the forms, for example, that we've created. And so it does actually leave us more opportunity in the future if we want to enhance it for us, because our development hours, they're not creating it from scratch. We're basically taking the product and making it our own. So I think for that part is really exciting. The other thing that's really exciting for both of our platforms is because they talk to each other. So the systems are able to talk to each other. So if a student transfers from Broward, for example, to our district, right now for our system, we request records. It could take up to 2 weeks, a month, I don't know, a year in some cases. Once we have the transfer form, we can actually just transfer electronically all the information over. So it happens like in a day or two where we can place students more appropriately, and both systems allow us to do that. So for us, these districts are some of the ones that we get lots of students from, but we also have students from other states, like for New York, for example. If a student comes from New York, we can just transfer their files down because they use the same system. And so that will really help instructional practice. We won't have to change the student schedule as much and things like that. Our platform comes into, right now, 35 different languages. So all of our reports and reporting tools can come in 35 languages, of course the 8 that we have. But the good thing about ours is anytime they add a language, even for a different district, we get that same language. So they're actually working on another language for a different district, which we will have by the time we roll this out. So we'll actually have 36 in the fall. We have 3 different platforms within ours. The 2 on the left is what we're really going to focus on. It's called Platform, but that's basically to make a comparison, our IEP system. That's where we make the ELL plans. All of our compliance progress monitoring and things like that is in that platform. And then Collaborate, it's an actually online system that allows teachers to collaborate. One of the things that happens in our world is once a student exits the program, we still monitor them for 2 years. And so we call those students LF students. And so teachers are having to progress monitor those students who may not be in a sheltered course or working directly with an ESOL teacher. And so that is really becomes quite cumbersome when you have, especially at a large comprehensive high school, and you have, 600 students who are LFs. And how do you really meet with all those people and really make sure you're creating really good plans and ones that are truly monitoring to say, are they making growth? So this is an online collaboration tool that will allow that to happen, and it feeds directly into the system that allows, so then once we get to whatever meeting we are with parents, all that information is right there together. We're not having to pull it from multiple sources. And like Kevin's platform, it already talks, this system has already been talking to like Focus and other things that we currently use. So that type of development is not needed because it's already in their system. We also have the option of instructional strategies. We won't be rolling that out right now, but if we wanted to in the future, we have this option, and that basically connects the plan to specific instructional strategies for that student. So if in the plan we're talking about these are the things we need, these are the accommodations or modifications we need, let's say they're having some challenges with oral language development, it will actually align oral language development strategies for the teacher to utilize in the classroom in specific subjects. So it kind of just helps take one of those areas and really focus on how do we help students directly. And so that's an option we will have within the 5 years.
So does that become almost a professional development component?
Yes, because it can be, because inside there's also professional development around each of those strategies. So it's a kind of online tools. And what's great for us is it's actually aligned to all the WIDA and Can-Do descriptor trainings that we've been doing for the last couple of years. So it's not something brand new. It's something we've been training on, so teachers kind of know, and they'll see those strategies and they'll be like, oh, that's what that means. And so it's just a better integration.
And reinforcement.
Yes.
So you're not going to start with that?
We're not, and the reason is because we've actually taken some guidance, again, like Kevin did from Broward and Miami-Dade. We're going to learn from other large districts who did this and did not, they've learned. And what their actual, because there's so much happening at the school level, really the ones on the left is what we needs to happen first. And one of the districts, I don't want to say which one because I'm going to go wrong, tried to do it all at once, and it did not go very well. It was a lot on the system. Another district started with these two, and then they rolled out instructional strategies over 2 or 3 years, and that was much more successful for them. So we're going to take that recommendation from those districts.
Is this product from the same vendor as the ESE product?
They're actually 2 separate vendors. We did try to make them the same just to make it easier.
Same PowerPoint, so it confused me.
Yeah, I know. because it really is, they're accomplishing the same goal. But yeah, 2 separate platforms. And similar what we have found and what this platform has found is that it's saved on average 1 to 3 hours per week for the people doing the actual compliance work. So we see that that's going to directly impact instructional practices and student achievement because we'll be able to give that time back. It also allows, like we say, more languages for our parents to be able to be more engaged, and allows for that collaboration. And so just like in Kevin's platform, our risks really are acceptance of a new system and the learning curve. We have the option to have, it will all be online, but we will also be printing, because we don't, in our compliance, you still have to have the paper, but it'll allow us at the school, region, and district level to be able to see what's actually happening. Because right now, if I need to know how many students are in a shelter course, I can either pull up schedules or I have to go to the actual folder and look at every individual student to figure out what the plan is for that student. And so, whether you have 30 students who are ELLs or you have 300 students, that's really a challenging feat. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm making an assumption here, but both will be piloted next year and not at the same schools.
That is correct. So we've worked really hard so we have very similar timelines on purpose for the district to be able to manage the systems. But we are very conscious of this different systems at different schools. And even as we start expanding, how that crossover will happen at the school that may have, when they start having both. So we have plans within the spring and then the summer of the next year to make that crossover. So, but initially, the pilot will be at completely separate schools.
Have the pilot sites been identified
Yeah.
for either or?
Not finalized.
Not yet, not finalized. We're going to try to use schools that we've been working with for some other things, but they haven't been officially finalized. We were waiting until we had this officially approved, then we would go for the official sites.
May I make one suggestion?
Absolutely.
That in either case, you don't sell it with saving time, because whenever someone is changing, they're not going to save time. And so eventually,
Fair point.
they will, but as long as you say you're saving these 2 hours a week, and they're not going
Initially,
to as
right.
they're learning it.
That's actually good feedback. Thank you.
Just a suggestion.
And did we answer your question about development? Okay.
I see that you're working on it.
Okay.
And I know you are, but I just, that's such a delicate place. And even trying, 30 schools, this district is so huge. To implement something new, and everybody is the same and different. And
Right.
it's tough. And just being on top of that, knowing that it's going to take additional resources to start, knowing that it takes additional time to start is really important, I think.
And
Absolutely.
it's important to note in regard to that IT budget, FTE with data, they've been engaged in this process throughout the entire time. So both departments have not been doing this in isolation at all. We've been working together with multiple other departments and divisions to be able to make
And
sure that we're moving
principals
forward.
and
And
teacher
getting
leaders.
stakeholder, exactly, thank you. Stakeholder input as well. I've been actively engaged with CTA, principals, teachers, resource teachers, all levels that support this work.
Karen?
In the pilot, is it 4 schools? Is it 10? Is it 12? Is there an opportunity to give schools who are maybe doing this on their own but haven't been working with you to say, hey, put my hand up, I want to start this, I want to try this? I don't know if there's a limited number.
So initially, we have kind of an idea like around 20 or 30, depending on the platform. But if other, the more we can get people on board, absolutely. So we would have that option once we kind of set the initial pilot schools. But also being very conscious, again, about making sure that we're not putting 2 different systems into one place right now.
And are they mostly elementary? Or are you doing all?
All levels.
All, including charter.
Okay. You answered my question.
The other thing about the time issue is teachers will now get to go home at an earlier time before 5 o'clock or 6 or 7. And can you do it? Can you use these at a home computer?
Yeah, as long as you can log into the portal, it'll be accessible.
But time-wise, teachers are way over. So, they may be able to cook dinner soon.
I just wanted to add that Kevin and Harvey presented to the Technology Advisory Committee last week, and our IT Project Management Office is also a part of this, and we'll be reporting out to the TAC Committee quarterly as well to keep them posted on, because it is kind of an IT project, so there's a lot of folks contributing, and appreciate these gentlemen leading the way here. So thank you.
And I love it that they're leading the way, not the IT department. Not that there's
Hovering over
anything
their
wrong with
shoulders
it.
carefully.
They gotta work
They're close
together,
behind us,
but-
though. but-
With us.
There's no other questions. We'll move it on to Heather. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Great job.
It's good.
Yeah, it's about time.
Yeah. Oh, God, I hated the whole night.
Okay, I'm going to start this off here. We wanted to give you a quick legislative update. The legislature will get started in March, but our committee meetings are already underway. These were just some of the, there's many bills out there. These are a few things we wanted to just bring to your attention because they potentially have a budget impact. The committee may recall that last year the legislature approved funding for a study of the Florida Price Level Index, and that's what really determines what we also know as the District Cost Differential, or DCD. And that's really the cost of living adjustment that varies county by county, and the intent is that it adjusts your funding somewhat to recognize that some places of the state are higher cost of living than others. So in Palm Beach County, we get about a 4% positive adjustment through the current DCD. And several years ago, back in 2003, there was a study done of the FPLI at that time. And at that point, we had gone from, for years, we had a traditional like market basket of goods type of, kind of like the CPI index, where they look at what do things cost in your community, and then they set that index. And in 2003, they introduced a new variable into the formula. It was called the amenity factor. And we struggled with this in Palm Beach County, because the amenity factor, what that did was, it said, look, if you're close to the beach, or you're close to like cultural attractions like the Kravitz Center or what have you, that people are willing to work for less money to live in that desirable area. And when they made that change, Palm Beach County lost a lot of money. We saw our DCD slip. Our school board sued the state over it. We were not successful, and that, has been a part of the formula ever since. So this is, now 15 years later, and there's another study. So currently, Palm Beach County has the highest district cost differential in the state, and we get a little nervous when people start talking about changing the formula. I'm a little more optimistic. From what I'm hearing is that they're now looking at moving towards a comparable wage index, because there's more data available through the Bureau of Labor's statistics, and hopefully that will bode well for Palm Beach County. This is right now, the study is just being done. The state has hired a consultant firm, as they were directed to do by the legislature, and they just gave their first report out to the legislature in January. But we're watching that really closely, because we would hate to see our district cost differential slip. Senate Bill 294 deals with facilities. This is actually a very positive bill filed by Senator Montford. And you may have read in the paper, we're trying to build a school down in Boca, an elementary school, and we fought with the state for several months to get their approval. Because now currently any money that's generated from our local capital outlay millage, or 1.5 mils, if we're going to add space in our district, new seats, new schools, we can only do that if we have DOE's approval. And DOE will look across our district and say, well, you've got empty seats. They may be far away, but that was the struggle. So this bill would actually say, if you're using local money, the school board has the discretion to basically build wherever they want. It's their money under their oversight. The other thing it attempts to address is, a few years back we had, they've put in some construction cost caps that you're only allowed to spend X amount per student station, depending on if it's elementary, middle, or high. And districts across the state are having trouble getting those projects off the ground and being able to build schools within these caps. So this bill attempts to kind of restructure those caps and allow for other factors that drive up cost of construction. And also, cost of construction can vary across different parts of the state. So we're supportive of that. And then SJR, that's a joint resolution with the leadership of the House and Senate, filed by Senator Diaz, but this is with the homestead tax exemption. This would exempt people that are age 65 or older and have been in their property for 25 years or more and are homesteaded. They would be exempt from all school taxes. So this attempts to get this basically on the ballot for November 2020. The legislature hasn't done the financial analysis of this yet, but we did reach out locally here in Palm Beach County, and there's quite a bit of properties that fall into this bucket. It's over 32,000 properties, and it represents like $4.7 billion in taxable value. And if we were to take that taxable value off our tax rolls for school revenue, we would lose over $30 million, assuming the state didn't do something to backfill those dollars. Otherwise, the state would need to pump in more of their state general revenue to make up the difference. So we're watching that one pretty closely as well. There's one more I want to mention that's not on the page, and that's Senate Bill 7030 on school safety and security. Safety and security is still a very hot topic. That was the bill that probably got the most attention this week, and there's being amendments made or proposed and all that. But it basically, a couple of the major things it will do is it would open up the Guardian program. Last year they said if you were a classroom teacher, you could not be a guardian. It removes that, and it would open it up to where teachers as well as other members of the faculty could potentially become guardians. Now in Palm Beach County, our school board passed a resolution and said we have no interest, in arming our teachers and are utilizing the Guardian program. In the past, under the last year's legislation, it required that both the county sheriff and school board had to approve whether or not to do the Guardian program. This bill would change it to where the school board has really the sole discretion, and if the school boards were to elect to implement the Guardian program, the sheriff would have to follow suit. It also just, it adds some more authority to the State Board of Education and DOE for enforcement. It adds that there would be a statewide threat assessment tool that would be in place by August 1st, where schools and personnel are evaluating the potential student threats. And then it puts some punitive measures in there that if a school district were not to comply with some of these rules, the superintendent's salary could be withheld until we get into compliance. So that would certainly get everyone's attention, I'm sure. So that's kind of just the legislative, what's going on. We'll be, things will be picking up here soon. Moving more to the budget, to predict our future here, we look at the recent past. And if you look at the last 3 years where we've ended up in the legislature, when all was said and done, Ms. Canoost has shown you kind of what was proposed, what was the outlook, what the governor may have proposed, the Senate and the House, and then the final conference is what we walked away with. So the last 3 years, we've had a 1% increase per student funding, and in the last 2 years, 1.39, and then again, 1.39% last year, which is pretty modest. And it's noteworthy, if you look at last year, of that 1.39% increase, most of it was in categorical funds with safety and mental health. And the base student allocation, which is our kind of most discretionary revenue source, only went up 47 cents. And now we've got the governor has released his budget.
Mike, what is long-range outlook?
The long-range outlook is the Florida EDR, which is the Economic and Demographic Research. They do all the work for the legislature, did a revenue forecast, and they forecast state revenue and the state budget needs on a 3-year window, and they update it every year, and that's what the legislature works when they build a budget. So the long-range outlook, it's influenced also by what's happened and what the expectations are. So what has happened is where the long-range outlook, you can see it's starting to fall, right? It's gone from 2.4 to 1.16. A lot of that's driven based on policy decisions. So as the legislature has continued to roll back the required local effort in recent years, when the EDR does their forecast, they say, well, that was a policy change. In the past, the EDR would assume that the required local effort would grow with the growth in the tax base. So they had to change the way they do their forecast based on really what the policymakers were doing in Tallahassee. So when they now assume that the required local effort will continue to be rolled back, that takes considerable revenue off the table every year. And then they also look at, how state sales tax revenue is expected to grow and what enrollment's supposed to do in terms of the next 3 years and rising cost, and they do their best to forecast. They'll categorize the budget needs at the state level as high priority, critical, and they do different budget forecasts. But that's basically what they're forecasting.
Are they a body independent of the legislature?
No, I don't think they're truly independent. They're an arm of the legislature.
I'm going to
They
say
have
no.
Yeah,
No, I mean,
no, they're.
Committee of, or are they nominated by?
They have a lead state economist, Ms. Amy Baker, and she does that work. But
Okay.
they do a good job. I mean, their forecasts are pretty right on. We follow their work pretty closely, because they look at all the variables that impact education funding as well as the whole state budget. But what you're seeing is kind of as the policies change, the revenue, their forecast then follow suit and say, okay. So this is going to be pretty interesting. So if you look at what their forecast was for FY20, it's a 1.16% increase per student. And the governor's budget came out recently, and at first glance, people might have got excited and said, hey, this is going to be pretty good. If you just looked at the bottom line, it would look like Palm Beach County is getting a 3.5% increase, but that's not really the case. So I'll try to explain that a little bit. At the top of the page, Heather's laid out our enrollment forecast. The unweighted FTE is basically equivalent to student enrollment. And you'll see we're going up about 662 kids is the current forecast. And we've seen our enrollment growth slow down. If you went back 2 years, we were growing about 2,000 students a year. This year, we only grew by over 400 kids, and about 40 of those students were in charter schools. Next year, with the 600 students, we're projecting about 300 in district schools and 300 in charter schools. But that's for a district of 190,000 plus kids. That's very modest. The base student allocation, under the governor's plan, the base student allocation would go up $50 per student.
Any idea why the enrollment is going down?
It's statewide.
Okay.
It's slowed down statewide. I mean,
Fewer kids
in
being
certain years, the
born?
birth rates drop off.
Okay.
But then also the number, Florida's still a growth state with people moving into it every year, but I think the population that's moving in is not necessarily bringing students with them.
Okay.
But so we get $50 per student more on the base student allocation. That's better than 47 cents, but that's still fairly modest. You'd really, to have a meaningful increase, you'd want to see that be like $200 or more. And then in the categoricals, the Safe Schools categorical would go up 50 million statewide, or just under 4 million here in Palm Beach County. On the other flip side of that, the digital classroom allocation, which is for classroom technology, was reduced $50 million statewide, and here in Palm Beach we'd lose about 2.5 million. So there was kind of a shift there in funding. The mental health assistant allocation would go up slightly, and we'd pick up about 700,000. Yes, Dr. Dunlop.
The shift in the digital classroom is possibly due to the de-emphasizing testing?
Possibly. That's a good
One would
theory. That's
hope.
the best theory we have, because we haven't, the other theory is that digital classroom funding is easy pickings. And that historically, if they have to cut something, that's the first thing they go after. But yeah, we've had staff that have that same theory. The governor didn't come right out and say it, but that could be. And,
that would save the check.
and then the real big issue that's different here is the Best and Brightest program, which is that bonus program for teachers and school principals. Up until this point, that has been funded outside of the FEFP. So as its own budget allocation. And last year it was $233 million statewide. The governor's increasing that program to about $423 million, but he's put it into the FEFP for next year. And when it's in the future year and not in the current year, it really skews your budget. And that's where you get that artificial type of, where it appears to be a great increase. In Palm Beach County, currently this year, we expect our teachers and principals to earn about $16 million in bonuses through that program. This would take it up to over $30 million for next year. And we're waiting, this is going to be part of the legislative process. The governor has also proposed some changes to that program that would kind of do away with that top tier bonus that was tied to teachers' SAT and ACT scores. And it sounds like he would like to limit it to just highly effective teachers. And then there's also some additional strings attached about the teacher just can't be highly effective, and they have to do more than just move their students. Their whole school has to show improvement. So we're still sorting through that, and we'll have to see what the legislature does with it. And Heather's made it easy for us here. So that's where, if you looked at total funding per student, we'd go up about $274, but a big chunk of that is the Best and Brightest money. So that 3.5% really falls to about 1.17% once you back out the state mandates. And then if you think about what the EDR came up with the 1.16%, it's right on. And the sad thing is that forecast goes out for 3 years, and they've got it at 1.16% every year. So we've gone through, 3 or 4 years of these 1% increases, and I think we should start planning for another 4 years of very modest 1% range type increases. Let's see, did I cover it? Okay, so the quick rundown, and this is early in our process. This will continue to evolve as the committee meets, but if we were to assume the governor's budget's it, and that's what we end up with, our budget position, we would have to fund a few things that come right off the top. The FRS employer rate is expected to go up about 0.25%. We got nearly $1 billion payroll, so that's about $2.5 million where the board will be contributing a little more to our employee benefit plan. And then we set aside the money that would be for safe schools and mental health. That Best and Brightest program passes right through to the employees. As our budget grows, we want to continue to build our contingency reserve to stay at 3%. And then with those 600 students, if we have about 300 of those in our schools, we'll have to add about 20 teachers, and that costs $1.4 million. And then we would want to start building an employee salary reserve. And just as a starting point, we look at that net increase in student funding of 1.7%. And say, well, that's at a minimum, we should have that type of salary reserve for employees, and that takes, $11.1 million. So pretty quick there. You can see we're no longer dealing with extra money coming in. We'd have about a $2.2 million deficit. That's not a huge number. I mean, we have a large budget. We could find ways to probably work through that. But again, it's just going to be kind of another lean year. And Heather will share some better news soon, thanks to the voters of Palm Beach County. So it's not all doom and gloom here, thanks to our local efforts and support. But with that, I'm going to hand it off to Ms. Knust.
Yeah, I know. I let Mike give you the bad news, and then I can give you the good news with all the referendum dollars. All right, so we do have, our general fund budget is going to be about $2 billion this year, and the referendum comprises 10% of our total budget this year. And we are very fortunate to the voters for approving that referendum. I know the principals are so appreciative in the resources that we're going to be able to allocate to them. We do have to make sure to remind the principals, and I've been doing this on the tour as I went and spoke to each of them, that we have to spend these dollars just how we told the voters we would. And they are very conscious and are on board with, they know that they have to keep those promises that we made to the voters.
Just in that line, they should also in their school newsletters and when they're meeting with parents and so forth, identify those things and say thank you to the public so that they continually are aware that those come from the referendum, because 10% is a lot of the operating budget. And
It is.
It is.
And we need to, I know, when someone's an endowed chair or something, they always say, I'm the William Randolph Hearst endowed chair. I'm the Palm Beach County endowed program. That, we just really need to keep saying it.
It's an excellent point. Our chief of staff, Ms. Schuyler, she started, after the sales tax for all the construction work, she started the Penny at Work slogan and those signs and the videos and everything, and we envision doing the same type of thing with this referendum because we're so dependent on it. And then I just wanted, that approval rate of 72.37%, that was the highest of any school district referendum in the state. So that was pretty good. We got a good community
Good for
here.
you and a good for the community.
But we will continue to reinforce this because in all likelihood, we're going to be back in
That's
2022 trying to get it renewed. Yeah.
It's amazing.
So I get to walk through each of the referendum initiatives, starting with mental health and our plan of how those funds will be spent. So with mental health, we're going to be investing approximately $22 million. We're going to be adding one mental health position per year, per school. I did provide a draft job description to each of you. It was presented at the last board workshop. And Mr. Oswald, the deputy superintendent, he had a previous commitment, but he is going to be down as soon as that is over, and he'll be here to answer any questions on this job description, as well as the follow-up questions from our last meeting on the MTSS coach. What's the difference between a counselor and MTSS coach in the new position? And how are those MTSS coaches that we currently have, how are they being utilized? So as soon as he's available, we'll take a pause, we'll address those questions, and then we can move on with the rest of the presentation. We worked with all of the principals. We had a group of principals where we met with, that are called the Superintendent's Budget Advisory Committee, where we walked through these initiatives. And we also went out to each of the division meetings, both elementary, middle, and high, and we walked through each of these allocations as well. The principals are not here today because of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. They're at their school sites, but they did want me to pass along, like I said, that they are just very appreciative of the support of the voters, and to be able to just have these resources at their school sites, they're just very excited with what they're going to be able to have next school year. We're also expanding the counselors in middle schools. So middle schools will have a minimum of 3 counselors. We will be adding, that results in us adding 20 additional counselors out. We want the counselors, this was a priority, in order to have the counselors have the time to really work with the students and not just on scheduling and different aspects, but really have additional time to work with the kids. By doing that, we also wanted to increase the extra duty days for the school counselor, both the regular school counselors and the ESOL school counselors, to provide supports prior to school The purpose for that is we're increasing the number of school psychologists by 40, which is the next item, for the school psychologists to do more of the testing over the summer months so that the students can be placed into their courses earlier in the school year as to not be disrupted, because all of the testing that goes into their scheduling. And that was a recommendation from the principal saying that's great that you're adding the school psychologist, but if you don't provide additional days for the counselors and in elementary school the data processors, we won't be able to make those changes in the schedule prior to the start of school, so you really won't be helping us. So that's why we added the 5 additional extra duty days, so that everybody's working together and they're getting as much done as they can prior to the start of school, so students are settled once they start. Yes.
And this might be a question for Dr. Oswald, so just tell me if it is. And this is great, but a lot of the information comes from the kids and also comes from Instagram. And, so, you know, kids doing all their pictures and all that stuff. Is there going to be some way to encourage kids, and there's a lot of kids in every school, see something, say something?
Yes, there is a push. We have social monitoring tools. We're also working on a threat assessment for students, and I know the school police has a program that they're working on as well for students to be able to report.
There's an app that's out there, and then there's this Fortify Florida. There's a couple apps out there, and then recently our district has contracted with a group that monitors social media and, you know, can identify potential threats through that and bring them to the school police attention.
I just don't know how you're getting, and you may be getting to the kids to say when you see something, say something, because I, again, had a situation with a middle school granddaughter, and she showed me something, and I said, you have to tell the school. And she was reluctant to, because didn't want to be a snitch or all that kind of stuff. So, you know, hopefully the parent will at least do it, but I don't know how, if there's any outreach where they say, hey, you know, it's cool, you need to do this. So I just, maybe, again, that's a question for Dr. Oswald.
Yeah, he could probably help us with that. I know that is still our greatest source of information is the students tipping us off to
Holy cow, they
threats on their campus.
know everything.
Yeah.
Yes.
In looking at the information on this page, each elementary school now gets a mental health position, right? Because all schools do.
Yes.
In terms of counselors, I don't see any additional elementary resources, and we have elementary schools larger than some middle schools. Were elementary principals satisfied with this allocation?
Perfect timing.
Right time. They asked for us to review it to look at if we could possibly. We tabled it. I think it was at the last budget meeting we had to look at maybe those over 1,000. But they are getting the new position.
Yeah, that's why I started with that, because I see that.
Yeah.
But everything else is about middle school and secondary, as it so often is.
Yes.
Have to start it early. Catch it.
And then I mentioned that you would be able to, that you have a busy schedule today, that you would be able to stop in and go over some follow-up questions from the last meeting, which was the job description from the new position that's proposed, the school behavioral health position, as well as giving the committee an understanding of what the current MTSS coach is doing, the difference between an MTSS coach and a counselor and this new position, how those MTSS coaches that we have now are currently being utilized.
Okay.
And it's perfect because it aligns with where we are right now with mental health.
Okay. So good morning, everybody. Let me start with. So you were talking about the new position, right? The middle.
Yes.
So take a deep breath. Good morning.
Good morning. So one of the positions that we've talked for a number of years, many people have heard Dr. Robinson talk about this MTSS coach type position, someone that can actually get on and deal on a prevention mode of when you think about the multi-tiered systems of support, MTSS umbrella, we think about making sure that school-wide positive behavior support's happening with fidelity. School-based team school-based team, when many of you are familiar with school-based team, when a child is having an issue academically or behaviorally, that this team is happening with fidelity, make sure that a child is getting the resources and support that they need, as well as, and how do we get into interventions that actually can help a child, in particular on the behavioral or the mental health side. And I apologize, I have a cold. I should probably move over one, right, Mike, so I don't get you. Is how do we make sure that if a child needs a behavioral support, if it's a dispute or behavior like restorative justice practices, trauma-informed practices, how do we get those practices into our schools where children can truly help and be supported? Now, can counselors and other people do those type of things? Sure, but they've got a lot on their plate, but someone who's really focused on those particular opportunities. So this new position it delivers on a lot more of those type of issues. Backing up to the current MTSS coaches, the behavior coaches that exist, they're currently under support services department. There's about 20 of them. They are working, so that originally designed, we had, years ago, he had gotten rid of the ATOS programs. We had dropped off some other programs that weren't happening, that weren't meeting the needs of kids. We took a lot of those dollars. We had closed the under-enrolled Gold Coast school. So we had some dollars to reinvest and look at schools that had high discipline rates. So in particular, the coaches that we have now are working with schools where there are high rates of out-of-school and in-school suspensions to help reduce that and deal with some root cause issues. So they're spread out either at one particular school or shared between two schools. They're more on a feeder pattern, so they can really start addressing the whole family issue. So mainly in high schools and middle schools and just a couple elementary schools. So I don't know if you want, we can send, I have the list of schools, we can send that out after, or if you want to talk through, but it was really based off discipline. Also, if there are schools that have particular gang issues, to be completely transparent, when those issues heat up, we pull these individuals. They tend to get more intel on what is happening in the community to ensure and reduce anything that can potentially spill over onto our school campuses. So they deal with a lot of those type of deep issues. Different than what you would see on this new position. So they're going deep on behavioral issues. So they'll do anything where there is crossover. They'll do anything from restorative justice practices, have restorative circles and conversations with kids to deal with these particular issues. Check in, check out is a strategy that is used in many of our schools. So they're checking in with those kids on a regular basis in the mornings, making sure they had a good night. Are you okay to go to class? And then checking out at the end of the day, how'd your day go? Everything going all right? And being that resource and support. So through that, year after year, we've seen a steady decline in our suspension rates through this resource and support, and kids being more on target. Also, at one point, our district was under a Department of Justice agreement, and there was also a negotiated settlement agreement here locally that we had to address this particular issue with suspension rates, and so that's really kind of the evolution of those particular positions. So they're dealing with some, very deep end kids who are very troubled. The new position, again, in response to the referendum, making sure that all schools receive support. This particular position, we're very excited about that. The schools are excited about it. Really looking for someone who has a mental health, behavioral health background, that preferred a bachelor's degree in something. However, we did amend that at recommendations of board members if they have at least minimum 5 years of experience of working with kids in some type of a setting, that they could also be in this particular position. So we will, the next step is to really work on how, in the direction of the board, of how we'll vet these individuals so that the schools can make sure that we get the best position.
Keith, some questions about this one, because I have some significant concerns. number one, having somebody that doesn't have a degree working with my child in therapy would not happen for my children. I'll tell you that right now. Your number two, the bullet number 2 of the licensed clinical social worker, certified mental health counselor, all of those people are either masters or specialist level. I don't understand why this is not in the T-bargaining unit and would have parity with guidance counselors, school psychologists, and social workers. Because I know how my people are, and if I sit at the table as less than, you're not going to listen to me. And I think that's a really huge thing, because if you're doing trauma-informed therapy, if you're doing crisis intervention, all of those things, you need to have some power behind you. And
Kathy,
I think...
can I interrupt? I'm sorry, it's 10:17.
I'm sorry.
Did we want to just take a moment of silence, and we'll just take a few seconds? Do we want to continue? Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Just some significant concerns about the position as written at this point.
Okay, so if I can address, I hear what you're saying. On the deep end work, therapeutic work, these are not those individuals. They're not the ones that are going to be doing therapeutic for kids who identify with some type of mental illness. That's where we spend a majority of our Stoneman Douglas dollars. That act, we spent over $2 million on co-located services.
Right.
So right now we're in 60 schools. Our goal is to continue to expand that next year with the referendum dollars. Just to give you some statistics, so this is a plan that we had to turn around on a dime this past summer, work with our providers in the community. The numbers we just had as of last week, we were just shy of 1,500 referrals in these 60 schools of kids who want additional and need additional support and services. 1,500 in the first semester only, in just 60 schools. If this doesn't tell you there's a need.
Oh.
We want to expand that level of deep support. These agencies can also refer out. We have a number of them that have more than a caseload that they can handle, so they're working with other agencies. Your other question, so this position is more of in between that. So they have the background, they're good at working with kids. The concern about the bachelor's versus years of experience was that in some communities, there may not be those who work better in a certain community. They may not have the degree and open up the opportunity, but they're great at working with kids. They've been doing this kind of work. It could potentially put them on a career path. You've got BIAs that are fantastic, as you know, that are just amazing at working with kids that could potentially fall into these type of positions, that have that skill set. They just may not necessarily degree. Also, the concern is there's just not enough individuals to hire here locally, and we need to open up the pool of people who can work with kids. The numbers to have almost 1,500. People always talk about that they're worried about the stigma. I don't think there's a problem with the stigma anymore. People want help. They want support. This 1,500 is a huge indication that that's the case. Why not the T-bargaining? Because we wanted to open up to a bigger pool. This wasn't, this was going, providing an additional support system for our school that I think we're setting up a model here locally that other districts will be looking at, that that's ideal to support kids. The school psychologists, the school counselors, we're adding more of those. They have their training, and we want to make sure that they're able to do the work that they do. Also, I think you were talking about middle school. Why middle school? Did you talk about the testing coordinator
Not yet.
position? Okay.
Yeah.
Can I?
Yes, you can.
Can I
So
ask
I just wanted to set context. We're adding a testing coordinator at the high school. One of the problems we have at the high school level is that the counselors can't get with kids because they're doing testing. So Dr. Fanui made it a priority, and Mike Heather worked so that we're adding a testing coordinator at the high school level because testing is year-round, and it's just, it's a bear to get your hands around. So that our high school counselors can actually get and do the work that they need to do in working with kids. So it's not to take away from school psychologists. It's another layer of support.
Well, they do different jobs.
They do different jobs. A psychologist isn't necessarily going to need to be
Do
the person
counseling.
running school-based teams or school-wide PBS.
Right.
That's a,
I'm just concerned of we can agree to disagree, but.
No, I hear you, but I want you to
Because I don't think
understand-
you're going to
sure.
get the license, you're not going to get licensed people to do this job because of the pay.
that has been the board members' concern too. Our HR department did an analysis. They said that this is the current range right now. If someone comes with more experience, obviously there's an
Tell
opportunity
you right
that
now,
they
they're
could make.
starting at about 40, and that's not licensed. The other thing is we don't have.
This is at 10 months too versus.
Yeah. The other thing is, does not show the certification for licensed mental health counseling as it's written in Florida, but I can tell you that later.
Okay.
It's not the proper title. We don't have LPCs. That's different state.
Okay.
We have LMHCs. And LMHCs registered interns, and I'm not sure about, we do have licensed clinical social workers. And that's the area that Palm Beach County has always been severely lacking in, is social workers.
And we're hoping that we do get a lot of people who have a social worker background to apply for this position. We didn't want to limit to just social workers.
I mean, there's licensed mental health counselors, social workers, and school psychologists and guidance counselors all have different areas of expertise and training. My concern is the bachelor's degree who has no training other than coursework. Those 4 people have significant internships, significant clinical practice, where at a bachelor's level you don't. And so that's my concern, to have.
Yeah, actually, we were just at FAU yesterday trying to work out some potential partnership with this position or the existing counselors that we might be able to fast track to have actually licensed clinical counselors through this partnership, as well as doing some seminars and modules around helping train these people up because they won't have the same type of background and training that school psychologist or a school counselor would have.
Now, does the principal have the option at the high school level to trade out one of those guidance positions for either a licensed clinical mental health counselor or a social worker?
A school counselor for this position?
No, I'm sorry, I kind of jumped. For the minimum 3 counselors per middle school, could a principal then trade out one of those positions and say, I want a licensed mental health therapist for that, or a social worker?
We haven't, I don't think, we haven't had that conversation. Right now, the middle school principals are pretty loud about wanting another school counselor when they only have 2, but they have 3 grade levels, the challenges. Middle schools are getting hammered with the threat assessments, the whole new threat assessment process, the number of threats that are coming in. Middle schools are getting bombarded across the state. There's just a need of additional support. Ideally, through the expansion of the co-located services, there won't be that need. That we can do that through our partnerships. But we hadn't had a deep conversation about that.
Is this where I should ask him? My question before you got here was, the kids always know what's going on. Is there any outreach through the counselors, or is it part of their training or something to make the kids feel comfortable enough to see something, say something? Because I have a granddaughter who's in middle school and showed me on Instagram what some kid had posted, and I said, you have to say something. And she was reluctant because of the stigma of you're a snitch. And so I didn't know if they're part of their, and I'm sure it is maybe, but their training is to get into the classrooms and say you're not a snitch. You know, I mean, I used the Marjorie Stoneham. I said there's 17 people dead now because somebody didn't say, well, in that case they knew, but anyway. So I just didn't know if getting into the kids, there's a part of that, because I think they know everything.
Yes, absolutely. We have a couple different apps that we have in Florida. We have one locally that was built by the sheriff's office, and then we have the Florida app that we've been doing a lot of training around with our schools. We've gotten, I can't tell you, we get them on a nightly basis. So we're doing a lot of PSAs to make sure the kids know to just report it. It's anonymous in schools,
Okay.
that it's anonymous. Also, we did a lot of PSAs about the consequences of posting. That, you know, if you make a threat, it could be a second-degree felony. We've had actually just recently partnered with the state's attorney's office, and in our high schools, they're doing presentations about the postings and what's happening, letting you know that a number of our kids now are facing a lifetime of consequences because of what they posted.
Right. Okay.
And so, yes, and we're continuing that. Our whole theme, Chief Kitzrow opened up with that we are all safety, teaching the kids that I am safety and what's your role. So, perfect example with your with your daughter, you said?
Granddaughter.
That, you know, she's safety too. So if you see something, you're part of school safety, and you have a responsibility to report something like that. So that was our big push.
Thank you.
We'll continue to push that, because we want your daughter to send that into the app.
Yeah, she did.
Interesting too that on the crisis team, I don't know if you talked about that. The rest of the money is how we spent on the Stoneman Douglas. We have 2 teams that are district hired that go out and provide support to schools when a threat comes in. They've already, again, this team probably really wasn't up and running until November. They had so they deal with the immediate crisis when a principal needs help. 185 cases so far since November that they've gone out to support schools to address issues that have been more complicated, trying to unravel, you know, a posting on Instagram, working with a new line of work that we have with the behavioral health side on school police. I'm working with Major Griffin on, they're working very closely with on the criminal side. So if that were to come through the app, they would follow up, really trying to figure out, just last night, for example, it happens, when I tell you, daily. John I. Leonard had a threat that came through, that we're going to have a shooting at the school. So all night on our behavioral health side with the police, they quickly tracked down the IP address at the kid's house. All this happened overnight. Searched the house, making sure that this kid didn't have the opportunity, realized he posted something stupid. However, now he's
In the
trouble.
system.
in trouble. So this is how quickly these things are working. So literally, you know, Major Griffin had an all-nighter as they worked through to make sure all this happens that people don't see.
And is the app information available to parents through whatever communication that they get
It's
all
all
the
over our
time?
website. Yeah, we pushed it out. We'll send it out again to this group. Heather,
Yeah.
we can push it out.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, but if she didn't know about it, then we got to do more.
Well, sometimes the parents have to push the kid too and
Yes.
say there is an app, and you know, it's just
Right.
kind of everybody talking.
And is that reported anonymously then?
Yes.
Faith?
So, yeah, just, Bill, I agree with Karen that kids know, and kids talk. They can't help themselves. I wanted to commend you in thinking about people who aren't degreed and aren't certified, people who know how to listen to kids and how to listen so that they will talk. And I think that the team can learn from one another, and that the more ways you can put them together to talk about issues at the school. And if there are some of these people who are really good at listening to kids and talking and letting kids talk, sharing that expertise across the spectrum of people in this team would be valuable.
Yes. Thank you.
We'll move on.
Yeah, so we'll move on to security. So we are investing approximately $22 million in security. We'll be adding approximately 110 officers, so that includes school resource officers, detectives, canines, trainers, and sergeants. And then we're also adding additional support staff, because if you remember last year when we added the additional officers to comply with Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act, we added the officers, but we didn't have enough money to actually add the command structure and support staff for those additional officers. So we'll be adding the additional support staff, not only for the additional officers we're adding now, but also for those that we added last year. There's also the software that includes social media monitoring, as well as threat assessment software, vehicles for officers, and all the equipment that goes along with outfitting a brand new officer.
Who are support staff for police officers?
Well, I'm talking about the command structure, as well as when you have additional officers, we need additional payroll support, for monitoring their time. So that type of, it's the whole infrastructure behind it. Yeah. So like I said, last year we did add the officers, but we just gave them 75 officers and nothing else to help support them. So now we're trying to, now that we have Chief Kitzrow, he's really working through a organizational structure for, planning it for a much larger department. It's pretty much double the size that it used to be.
And that's 110 on top of the 75 they got last year.
On top of the 75, but they're not all school-based. It's going to be approximately it's probably going to be another 75 to 80 school-based officers, and then additional sergeants on top of that. And it takes significant time to hire. We added 75 officers. Remember, this year they've hired around 50. And then they're also at times losing them too, to the county and other areas. So it is competitive because they're needed statewide. And so even though when we send out our school budgets, what I've been telling the principals is you'll be able to see the number of officers that will be allocated to your school site, but they won't necessarily be filled at the start of the school year. We will be filling them throughout the year, and they'll be placed based on a priority. This current year, to comply with the MSD Act, we did use contracted security. So we were working with the municipalities and the county. So we're still working through whether they're going to continue once they have the officer, at least one per site, whether they're going to continue with the contracted services, or whether just as they fill the positions, just wait to fill the positions versus using a contracted security for those ones that are over and above what's required by the MSD Act. We do have some police aides at certain school sites. Those police aides were added after Sandy Hook, so we're going to continue to fund those police aides. They were for schools that didn't have a single point of entry, but we're continuing to fund those. We're also expanding them to some additional schools. We're going to continue to fund the school security monitors that we added last year. We added those, one at each middle school and high school. And they provide for a little bit more flexibility than a school-based officer or police aide. They are able to be utilized in the classroom, and those positions report to the principal instead of reporting to school police. That was a request from the schools. They just wanted to have, extra set of eyes on the campus. And the continuation of these positions really, it depended on the passing of the referendum. We're also continuing to fund additional overtime at high school athletic events. We provided additional money for high schools this year to cover the varsity games, varsity football games, and we let them keep any of the additional monies once they utilized it for high school for other activities. We also have an allocation for middle school and high school that hasn't been changed in many years. We were able to increase the security allocation from $1,000 to $10,000 for middle school, and for high school from $6,000 up to $20,000. This allocation is also utilized for overtime of officers at after-school events. They also use the money for wanding. Some of the schools, certain events use wanding. Prior to going into the games. They've also had to utilize some of this funding for charter busing because we also moved the startup time of the games, which conflicted with the busing schedule, so they weren't able to use district transportation, so they had to actually have charter buses. So that's why we're giving them the additional money in order to help with the additional costs that incurred as a result of the change in security measures. The high schools were very thankful for the additional funding. We can continue to fund over 700 fine art positions, so not only elementary art, music, and PE, but choice and career academy teachers. It's currently over $50 million. And the biggest chunk of the funds is to improve teacher pay. This is the first time we've been able to do something really substantial for our teachers. We're going to invest approximately $110 million for teachers all in the T-bargaining unit. With greater than 1 year of experience, will receive an annual retention supplement that is FRS eligible of $1,000, $5,000, or $10,000. And we will start this. We did agree, we entered into a memorandum of understanding with CTA end of January, and these payments will start at the beginning of the next school year in August. And Harvey and Kevin had to step away, so I'll do the best that I can going through the other initiatives that were the budget-related initiatives for ELL and ESE. So if you recall, we presented last year to the committee that we were doing a pilot program for our ELL allocation. And I included the pilot schools on this slide. And what we found as part of the pilot, we changed the formula to utilize proficiency as part of the weight. We weighted the student based on proficiency and built that into the allocation model. What we found was it was a little more difficult than we had anticipated. Coming to Mr. Sill's point as to the variation that you have come from the spring budget to count day, come count day, a lot of the students hadn't been tested at the start of school, and so we didn't really see the benefit. We didn't see the benefit that we expected to see, and there were also other issues where we noticed that there were differentiation that was needed between the elementary levels and as well as the secondary levels, specifically with the immigrant students or those that are the newcomer. I wish that Harvey was here. I do not know what SIFE stands for. I should have asked him, and but it's related to immigrant students, specifically at the secondary level. And if we had used that pilot program, we would have utilized all the funding that we had set aside for ELL. And so that would have meant that we had no flexibility that, if there was additional growth or if a school site just had additional needs, unique needs, we wouldn't have had anything left over in order to allocate additional resources. So based on the feedback that we've received, we decided to maintain the original formula that we have, so no longer weight it based on access. We did decrease we felt it was a priority to put more of the funding that we had into teachers. So we reduced what we call the roundup or the trigger point for elementary schools from 0.5 to 0.35. So that means that the elementary schools will be generating a teacher quicker than what they were. Harvey or Mr. Owaka thought it was important that we add back in the CLFs. So in the past, we were only giving one CLF. We had made a change in this committee. We brought it to this committee at one point that we had to make some budget reductions because as part of the review that we had with ERS, we were investing a lot more on non-instructional staff for our ELL students as compared to other comparable type districts. So their recommendation was we put more into teachers. So what we did is we reduced the number of CLFs which are community language facilitators, and they're generated right now based on if you have 15 students that speak a specific language, they receive one community language facilitator as soon as they hit 15. In the past, we started to allocate multiple once they've reached 200 students. But since we had so many additional non-instructional type staff, it was mainly in those CLF positions. We changed the formula, reduced it back to where you just only had one per language per site. But it wasn't really fair when we started looking at those other schools that have concentrations of a specific language of 600 students, that they're getting the same one resource as compared to another school that has 15. So originally in the pilot, we had proposed 300, but what we're recommending is that at 400 LYs, that's when we would add the second CLF in that particular language.
Is that 400 LYs that speak a specific language?
Correct. Yeah, so it would be, for Spanish or
Gotcha.
we have a
Yeah.
whole laundry
So at
list.
15 you get one, but then you have to be at 400 to get
To
a
get the second one. In the past, we went back to you only received one. So the schools are thankful to now just at least get something back. We're also adding back a second coordinator for those schools that have more than 700, not only LYs, but LYs and LFs. Initially in the pilot, it was proposed at 800, but based on the school sites and the complexity of the school sites, that was dropped down to 700. We added 5 extra duty days for the ESOL coordinator, and that was part of aligning with the work we were doing with trying to get everything done over as much as we can over the summer months. So aligning that also, you would also need the ESOL coordinator available to make sure that the scheduling for the student is appropriate. We're looking at, we're also proposing for the dual language, reducing that from 100 and reduced to, it was 100 at 175. They received a dual language teacher, reducing that to 150. It actually doesn't impact any schools, but we wanted to give, where Harvey was coming from was trying to give those secondary schools something to strive for, that if they can grow that program, they would be able to generate another resource. And in order to really reach those immigrant students, setting aside $500,000 for these secondary schools to create a grant or a plan that they will submit to the multicultural department, proposing how they would utilize the funds, requesting a certain dollar amount, and then how those funds would be utilized. And it could be anything from tutors to possibly adding, an additional CLF if they can explain how that's going to best meet the needs of their students, specifically those immigrant students. And this would also be available to elementary schools if there is funding available after the initial grant application process. So we're also looking, we had, if you remember last year, we had centralized some dual language positions and coordinator positions for those schools that we were allocating above their normal allocation, but we weren't really seeing a growth in their population. So instead of allocating individual units out to the school, those positions were centralized so that they could support multiple schools. So we're going to continue with that. And then there's an additional cost for the DELE tests, and I wish Harvey was here again to explain that, but it is it's a proficiency test. There is an additional cost for it, and the schools really didn't have the funding. They weren't generating additional funding. The money actually sits, the budget sits within the multicultural department, and the schools request it, and it's similar to the grant, and the funds are allocated back out to the school site. And then you received an overview of the specialized education management system, Elevation, which is the one that prevailed as part of the RFP and now has to go through the process with the board. And that's why we can't give you as much information, or they're not able to give you a detailed outline, because until it's really truly approved by the board, we're not able to actually pay the vendor. And so that's when they'll really get into talks with the whole program management of that process.
Do we have a cost estimate of what those two programs are going to be?
The ELL system is around $200,000, but it's a per student amount. So it's based on the number of students that are actually on the system. The ESE system is around $500,000. And we had set funds aside based on changes that they had made within the allocation in order to cover the costs of both of those programs.
And that's an annual expense?
It's an annual expense.
I had another question, but I don't know.
When you think about it, you can bring it up.
I meant to ask them, do we have an idea of what percentage of the student population is affected by each of those programs?
For the ESOL students, it's about, I want to say it's about
10%, I think, right?
yeah, because it's, yeah, I would say about 10%, and then for ESE, it's about 20%. 15% ESE and about 5% gifted.
Thank you.
And that includes the charter schools. And that was a question that I asked as well, whether the charter schools would have access to the system. But there's going to be a wealth of information that we're going to be able to have access to that we don't have now. And so that's really what's truly exciting, that they'll be able to do so much more from a central level, not only within the ESC and ELL departments, but on the instructional superintendent sides as well, to be able to look at this information for their group of schools, be able to track it and graph it.
So the answer to that question was yes, charter schools will have access
Yes, they
to
will.
these systems, because so many students move back and forth to remove them from the system and then try to reintegrate them. Would have been foolish, so I'm glad to hear that.
Yes, yes. And that was because Harvey and Kevin, thought it was just as important. They're students within the district as well, and we have to report their information to DOE. And it is fully integrated. Both systems, it was very important to both of them that it's fully integrated with our SIS system, so it's not duplicated work. The SIS system really is our system of record, so all the student information is going to be entered in the SIS system and then fed into these other two.
But the Medicare reimbursement is so important to paying for the students. That's having that in a central place is really good.
Yes, and being able to have access, all the information that's needed all in one place. And it also gives us the potential to look at other possible revenue generating solutions with, possibly transportation. Once we have it within one system, being able to, right now we just don't have the ability to track it at the level that we need to for federal reimbursement purposes.
So
but that would be down the road, but yeah, that's another module we could potentially add.
It will begin to pay for itself.
Yes,
or
I
pay
believe so.
A good portion.
Mm-hmm. So based on the changes with ELL, this just gives an overview of the impact. So $1.3 million, the bulk of it is going into our elementary schools, but really all are going to be benefiting. It's a total of $2 million. And like I said, this has already been paid for based on changes that we have made throughout the past couple of years related to ELL. So all those changes that have been made, we're reinvesting back into the program. Okay, now for ESE, we had an ESE pilot, a small ESE pilot with 9 schools where we looked at a hybrid model between a matrix, looking at their actual matrix level, and a matrix and a staff allocation model. Initially, we were strictly looking at, we were going to give each school a per student amount based on their matrix level. But as we worked with the pilot schools, we realized that there are certain programs where the matrix level really doesn't align to the needs of the student, like with the EBD students, where there are lower matrix, but they have a high need in the number of staff that we provide. So we created a hybrid model where those certain positions were pulled out, like for the EBD program, pre-K, the ESE contact. Those were all allocated based on a staff allocation model, speech as well, and then the remaining amount was provided in a dollar amount based on matrix level. We did get very good feedback from the schools that participated. It was all positive. I would say, though, that those in the secondary schools had a lot more benefit from it because they could possibly be getting $1 million to decide how they were going to spend their funds and to service their VE students, because it was mainly that population. They would prepare a plan. It would go up through their instructional superintendent, their ESC coordinator on the instructional side, and also went through Kevin McCormick, as well as through the deputy superintendent. And the principals that participated, a lot of them really thought outside the box and really looked at the needs of their students to develop the staffing that was best for their school sites. One thing that we didn't think about was that there could have been some students that were gained, high matrix level students that were gained right after count day, and we didn't have anything set aside in order to give them extra money. And if they're going to get a 255 that was worth $36,000, they needed those additional resources to really service those students. So we did make some changes to the pilot this year to, pull some money out so that we could make those adjustments when those students did, if they did show up at the school sites. We left it open to the schools on a voluntary basis for them to participate, for anybody else who wanted to participate in the pilot program this year. Unfortunately, we did get a lot of schools that wanted to participate, but in order for it to work, you need some schools that are going to be gaining and other schools that might be losing some. And unfortunately, we didn't get enough schools that would be losing in order to actually expand the pilot this year. So we are allowing the schools that were in the pilot this year to continue, and out of the 9, 7 are going to continue. And we're going to wait and see what happens when we implement the new IEP system, because the goal was, really try to utilize the information in the IEP system to tweak the current formula that we have to really address the need. So this one is kind of, on hold, and we're really waiting to see what happens with the new IEP system. So that will take another year to 2 years before we would start making changes with the formula. So that was the best I could do without the two of them here. So hopefully that was okay. So now let's get into the non-referendum initiatives. And Mr. Oswald was very excited about the testing coordinator. And this was an initiative that was pushed specifically by Dr. Fenoy for each of the high schools, that they have somebody dedicated for testing so that they're not utilizing the time of their counselor. The high schools were very appreciative of this. We also needed to add additional time to the data processor, 2 additional duty days to help with any scheduling changes at the elementary level prior to the start of school. So because our goal is to try to get as much done and the students ready and settled by the start of school. And finally, we're increasing the fine arts non-salary allocation, which is the first time in probably 20 years.
Yeah.
And when I went around, Mr. Burke gave me the opportunity to go around to the divisions this year to present out the allocations. And I mean, at one point, one of the divisions almost gave me a standing ovation, which was, and I said, it's thanks to the voters that we're able to do this. But they're very thankful. Something as small as we're increasing this arts for elementary, we're able to triple it this year. We're able to add an arts allocation to middle and high school as well. And I know in the capital budget, they're also trying to add $1.5 million, so $3,000 for each elementary school and $20,000 for each middle and high school for instrument replacement and choral equipment each year. And so there are a lot of competing priorities within the capital budget, but that is also a priority of Dr. Fenoy. And so I think there's a good chance that we'll be able to see that in the capital budget, not only this year, but every year. So the impact of all of the non-referendum related initiatives is $2.8 million, but we are able to fund these through realigning of existing resources. Because we already talked about that with ESC and ELL, but with our existing initiatives, we've been able to realign in order for this to have no actual impact to our budget this year. We are working with our departments. We moved up the process with our departments a month earlier, and that was to help with our school sites, because many of our departments do provide supports to the school sites and do have teachers positions within their departments. And so it helps with aligning with the UAP procedures on the HR side. Each of the department heads is performing a line item review, and will be presenting out to the superintendent and executive leadership the week of February 25th. And the results of those meetings will be brought back to the Budget Advisory Committee on April 18th. This is just when you look at the piece of the pie for our budgets, about 9% is related to departments. But the largest piece of that, transportation, comprises 30% of our total department budget. So transportation is a big chunk of where our department goes to. We do have a lot of challenges that that we continue to face each year. We are very fortunate that the referendum passed. Otherwise, we would be looking at a $50 million shortfall. But we are looking on, those referendum dollars are not there to balance our budget. They're there for those initiatives that we promised to the voters. So we are, on the FEFP, on the state funding side, we are looking at just keeping probably approximately a 1% increase each year. And then also just the slowing of enrollment growth, not only in Palm Beach County, but statewide. We were fortunate this year that we had an increase in enrollment. There were some districts that were starting to see declining enrollment. So it's not only in district schools, but also charter schools. The past few years, district schools have been growing faster and adding more students than charter schools, but we're really just starting to see it slow down at both the district and charter school level. And I don't have to go through the whole entire timeline, but I just wanted to point out where our checkpoints are with the board workshops and the budget advisory committees, because we're not only working with the advisory committees, but we do get a lot of input from our principal and other stakeholder groups throughout the district. We are on track to release our school budgets February 20th. That has been an initiative that we've worked on the past couple years at the request of the principals, because they want to be able to have access to the best quality teachers as early in the recruitment process as possible. We are releasing our school budgets prior to actually even knowing what our funding will be from the state. And we're able to do that by, we're not making a lot of changes within the allocation formula other than on the other than with those referendum dollars. And the principals do know when we release those school budgets, it does say in there that it is, still dependent on what is approved by the legislature.
Just have to say, Ms. Knust is really making me look bad. I was budget director a long time ago, and we didn't get the school budgets out till Mr. Seals knows. It was maybe after spring break. And,
We check our email every 20 minutes.
And we never increased the arts allocation. So.
No, and that's way more than 20 years.
Good job, Heather. It's all you.
Yeah, at least I was smart enough to hire.
Yeah, I wish I could take credit for that, but Sam Malicio she's not here today. She's actually up in her office working on making sure the school budgets are going to be out on February 20th. Especially with all these changes with the referendums, it changed all of her sheets. So that's what she's been really working on to make sure that the schools see everything that they're going to be receiving this year. And then also on the department side, Mr. Ostafi is here, and he moved that process up a whole month this year from what it was previously. And I think it has been very helpful having the two processes run parallel between the school and the departments. Our next budget, well, the legislative session starts March 5th, so I am looking every day and waiting for the House and Senate proposals to see where they're going to come in at. I really do expect we're not going to see much in the base student allocation. The bulk of it is going to go to school security and mental health. We already spend significantly more in school security than many other districts in the state. It's always been a priority for us. We've had our own school police department, and that will only help to assist with the lack of funding that we have been receiving in the past related to school security, because we've been spending, like I said, way more than what we've actually been receiving.
Go ahead, Karen.
Just talking points in case we ever run across anybody who might actually vote in the legislature. So the point is that all the extra money that you're seeing on there, it's not getting in the classroom. So the kid's not getting it. It's good, the teachers and wherever the bonuses are going to, but it's not helping in the classroom.
Right. We don't have any flexibility with those additional fundings.
So that would be the message is the teachers are still going to have to, with whatever extra money they may be getting, still buying supplies and all that other stuff.
Right. And that additional money is still supposed to be a bonus, which is not FRS eligible.
Right. Okay.
So
That's the bonuses the governor has proposed.
right, the
Right.
best
And
right,
brighter.
correct.
The retention supplements to the referendum are FRS eligible.
Okay.
And also, I don't know if we talked about this, we did settle with our teachers this week. We reached agreement on a
Congratulations.
contract. It provides, on average, a 3% raise back to the start of the school year, so that's good.
And that really was, stretching our budget this year, but, we did have, additional vacancies this year, which we expect will start to decline, especially with the additional retention supplements, which was part of the purpose of, needing to do something substantial for our teachers to attract and retain really the best quality employees. So our next budget advisory committee is April 18th, and then we'll have our board workshop on May 1st. And so really around that, then our budget advisory committee is on June 7th. But even by April 18th, hopefully we'll still have a good idea of where the legislature is going with our funding. Our budget we already know what additional costs we're going to have. We already know additional staffing that's going to be needed. So it's just, we are nearly balanced where we are right now. And so I don't see an issue with us really finalizing everything on June 7th. And tentative adoption is on July 31st, and final adoption is on September 4th. So any questions, concerns?
One last question. Who is your Tallahassee lobbyist?
We contract with Mr. Ron LaFace of Capital City Consulting.
Okay.
And then he has a staff member, Megan Fay, that has joined his firm that works in education.
Okay.
with us.
That's Nick Irossi's group.
Excuse me?
Is it Nick Irossi's group, Capital City?
No, Ron LaFace is the principal owner of
Okay.
Capital City.
Okay.
So in the same vein as Karen's questions, are there things that you want to reiterate about those first three bills that you mentioned?
We support Senator Monford. Senator Monford, is also the head of the Florida Superintendents Association. He's a former superintendent, so his proposals seem to be usually in the best, always in the best interest of school districts, from what I can tell. So that would be great. That would provide some flexibility on our capital planning, our capital budget. The big issue that we've been promoting, and we had a meeting with our legislative delegation recently, the local delegation, this issue with the required local effort and the continuing to roll it back. The governor's budget also, once again, rolls it back. He does allow growth for new construction in the state, which is a little help, but that's been one of our major pushes, because if they continue to keep rolling back the property tax, that's that's what funds education in our state, coupled with the state revenue from the 6% sales tax. So to me, I feel like it just paints a really dim picture for the future, and to take that revenue off the table when there's no alternative source coming in. So we've been pushing, allow the RLE to grow. There's been some proposals to raise teacher pay. You know, our concern is if we get, like, there was one that would say, you know, all teachers must make at least 50,000. That would create problems. First, we got to make sure they actually give us money to do it, and then, you know, what do you do to those teachers that have just got to 50,000 after 10 years, and now a new hire comes in at 50,000? We just work to try to address that compression issue. So we try to just watch out for unfunded mandates. The biggest help to us is allow the RLE to grow, allow the base student allocation to grow, and then allow the school boards to do what they need to do their job, adopt their budget, and then provide salary increases by working directly with our teachers union. And not have
Senator
some.
Diaz bill needs to die.
Well, yeah, that's, you know, that's one is just a threat again to our revenue.
That's a huge threat.
Yeah. We just went through Amendment 1, which would have,
Yeah.
you know, increased homestead exemptions. That failed. That was one of the few.
Didn't the voters just make a decision about that?
Yeah,
Or-
they did.
It was the only one that
Weigh in?
failed. I mean,
Right.
there was a couple others that I thought should have failed too, but, you know.
Did any of the other ones hurt the district? Of the constitutional amendments, any significant?
There was Amendment 5 that now if there's going to be any type of new fee or tax increase, you need a 2/3 vote of the Senate and the House. And I'm not exactly 100% sure how that will impact, like with the RLE issue. I'm not sure they're going to interpret that to say, okay, well, if they're going to do anything other than roll back the RLE, we now need a 2/3 vote. I've heard, I think as of late, it will not come into play because the RLE was an existing
Oh, okay.
tax. Let me think. There probably were some bad things in there. I know they dropped the Amendment 8 that dealt with board term limits. It's been a while.
There were bad
Jerry,
things in
any
there.
help over there?
Yeah,
What
no,
was-
I can't remember anything other than the taxes, the 2/3 vote that probably would have affected the schools more and stuff. So,
Yeah.
I mean, statewide, all constitutional officers have to be elected, and you know, Miami had a really good election season with an unelected supervisor of election, so now they'll have to change that down there. You know, not every other county can say that, but you know, so yeah.
I think that's it.
But, anything else? We're adjourned. Thank you. Thanks for everyone coming out today.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day.